Now joining us is a man who produced a ranking of the FBS quarterbacks, the top 35. He has Tanner Mangum, number 24. His name is Matt Brown. He's a college football writer and an editor from my favorite website name in the history of websites, sportsonearth.com. Matt, welcome to BYU Sports Nation.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
It's great to have you here on the Deseret First Credit Union hotline. We've had another Matt Brown on. He's with SB Nation. I imagine you might get confused for him on Twitter sometimes. Is that the case?
We have been confused for each other on Twitter and even on live radio. So I'm glad you guys have us know who's who. That's good.
Have you ever met? Have the two Matt Browns ever met? And if so, who would win an arm wrestling contest?
We have met, and I would never pick myself in an arm wrestling competition.
Well, you produced this list of the top 35 quarterbacks in FBS. You have Tanner Mangum at 24. What makes him a top 25 guy in college football, in your opinion?
Well, I think we certainly saw signs of it 2 years ago. Obviously, he's in an unusual situation in that he unexpectedly started 2 years ago and then basically sat for a year. But, he's a strong-arm quarterback with good mechanics who really showed flashes of potential. Now, he was inconsistent as a freshman, but, that's to be expected for a guy who wasn't even supposed to start that year. And, there's needs to cut down on mistakes, needs to not force so many passes. But I think he is a very skilled passer. He was a top recruit for a reason. And I think we saw a lot of that potential in what was, I think, a pretty impressive debut. Third for 3,300 yards, average 7.6 yards per attempt. Was a very, very solid 2015 season, and I think he'll build on that even with the year of kind of sitting on the bench between.
When you were going over this list and putting this together, what is the criteria that you look at when coming up with this ranking?
Oh, yeah, it's a mix of, looking at production, what guys have proven already. It's looking at projecting a little bit forward and looking at potential. It's watching them play and blending that with the stats and consistency and all that. So there's no perfect way to do this, certainly. But it's not NFL draft rankings either. It's just trying to look at who based on what we know from the past, from what these guys have done. It's how do they stack up with each other going into the season? It's a list that will change. There's going to be some breakout players. There'll certainly be some surprises. But based on what we know, how do we think this season's going to look?
And we'll talk about some of those other quarterbacks on BYU's schedule in a moment, but more on Tanner Mangum. In 2015, BYU had Robert Anae as its offensive coordinator, spread, chucking the ball a lot. BYU attempted like 100 more passes than last year, where Ty Detmer comes in with the new head coach. He's the new OC. The scheme changes. So the stats don't pop necessarily the same way in a pro style that a spread do. How does that affect, say, postseason rankings of these quarterbacks, maybe at the end, in an offense that isn't as eye-popping with the stats?
Yeah, it definitely makes it a little bit harder to stand out. But, I think Mangum is somebody who is in a unique situation that people got acquainted with him pretty quickly based on the Hail Mary and was basically a Hail Mary against Boise State the next week 2 years ago. So I think he is a familiar name despite the kind of odd circumstances of his career. The stats probably won't, the stats won't be as high as, BYU is sometimes familiar with quarterbacks over the past few decades. But, if he's efficient, if he still makes some big plays, I imagine he's going to make big plays. We saw that he's capable of doing that when he started 2 years ago. I think he'll be good off play action. So I still think there's an opportunity to put up some big games, and that certainly that can hurt the perception a little bit. But if you're efficient, if you have a higher completion percentage, if you have a good TD interception ratio, there's still a way to get noticed, and I think Mangum can do that.
Talking with Matt Brown from sportsonearth.com, joining us on the Deseret First Credit Union hotline here on BYU Sports Nation. You said in this piece that the 2017 season will be one of the most exciting for quarterbacks in recent memory. How so?
I think there's a lot of potential NFL prospects. When you look at Sam Darnold, Josh Rosen, Josh Allen, Mason Rudolph, you have the returning Heisman winner, Lamar Jackson, who, there's some weird backlash to him, even though he had 5,000 yards total, 51 touchdowns last year. He's a really, really exciting, fun to watch player. You get him coming back. You get Baker Mayfield, who's been a top 4 Heisman finisher 2 years in a row. Jake Browning last year in the Pac-12 was probably number 2 for the Heisman for 2/3 of the season. Really, really efficient quarterback. So I think there's a lot of proven guys, a lot of intriguing guys. J.T. Barrett was a top 5 Heisman finisher in 2004. Luke Falk has thrown for over 10,000 yards in his career. So I think there's just a fun mix of quarterbacks this year. The Pac-12 is loaded. Big 12 has a couple big-time quarterbacks. You get the Heisman winner back. And then the SEC, which has been down in terms of quarterback play the past few years, there's a lot of intriguing young players and transfers. You look at Will Zaire coming into Florida, Garrett Stidham coming into Auburn, and then, just a bunch of touted young players who started as freshmen, whether it's Jake Bentley at South Carolina, Jacob Eason at Georgia, Shea Patterson at Ole Miss, Jalen Hurts was the SEC Player of the Year as a freshman. So when you add that in, where there's just a lot of potential to some of these big names that are back, I think there's just a fun mix of quarterbacks back. And, some of these guys, there's going to be some breakout players that maybe in the SEC especially that rise up this list over the course of the year.
Matt, you mentioned a lot of quarterbacks there. 2 other guys on your list that are in the top 20 that you did mention that I want to talk about. Brett Rypien of Boise State and Nick Fitzgerald of Mississippi State. 2 guys that BYU played last year, and they will play again this year. Tell us a little bit about what you think of Rypien and Fitzgerald.
Yeah, it's weird now for the Mountain West that, Josh Allen is now the most hyped quarterback, maybe a top NFL prospect. But Brett Rypien's been first-team All-Mountain West his first 2 years on campus at Boise State. Pretty much the biggest recruit Boise State's ever had, 4-star quarterback. And, he was forced into action early by an injury, but he's been, as a freshman, he made a few too many mistakes, but he's been a really productive passer for the Broncos. He throws a really nice deep ball, averaged 9.3 yards per attempt last year, which was right up there on the national leaderboard. So he's a guy who's clearly took a step from his freshman and sophomore year. He has a great receiver in Cedric Wilson and is a big play quarterback. So I think he's going to have a big year. And then, Nick Fitzgerald from Mississippi State was kind of quietly had a huge year, as the replacement for Dak Prescott. And Mississippi State didn't have necessarily a great season, but Fitzgerald, rushed for 1,500 yards was right up there on the SEC leaderboard. 1,300 yards, was second in the SEC in rushing. Inconsistent as a passer, but showed some potential there, but was one of the best running quarterbacks in the country, certainly. So kind of quietly underrated last year, and he's probably going to have another huge season, at least as a runner.
Fitzgerald's an interesting one. Rypien just tore up BYU. He was awesome. Fitzgerald did not as much in the head-to-head matchup with the Cougars. 1 TD pass, 2 picks, 5.9 yards per attempt, 2.6 yards per carry, 14 points in regulation. So I don't think BYU fans were overly impressed, although you look at the season for Fitzgerald, he reminds me of Taysom Hill after his sophomore year, who was pushing 4,000 total low. But he's a 54% passer, 6-7 record, yet people think he's going to be really good, yourself included, top 20.
Yeah, it was funny because right after that BYU game, he kind of took off. He had over 100 rushing yards in 6 of the last 7 games, including 258 yards in the Egg Bowl win over Ole Miss that got them to a bowl game. Yeah, he's still raw. He's still especially raw as a passer. He has turnovers first half of the season, and some down games, especially that BYU game. But I don't think anybody would look if this was a ranking of the top 20 passers, he wouldn't be on there. But I think he has potential there, and he's one of 5 quarterbacks last year who ran for 1,000 yards, and it was up at, as I said, over 1,300, average 7 yards per carry. So he really got better over the course of the season. And had big shoes to fill. Dak Prescott was the best player in Mississippi State history, and Fitzgerald did a nice job over the course of the year. They won a few big games at the end of the year. They beat Texas A&M. They beat Ole Miss, which got them to the postseason. So, it's tough. They faced some great defenses, and BYU's played very well in defense. So, but Fitzgerald he's an explosive runner, and Dan Mullen has been terrific with coaching quarterbacks and coaching running quarterbacks. So it's certainly reasonable to expect big things. He'll still only be a junior this year.
You mentioned Josh Allen a second ago, and BYU will not face Wyoming this year. I guess maybe there's a chance in a bowl game. Who knows?
Hopefully not again.
Yeah, hopefully not again. But they did face each other last year in the bowl game. I mean, he was okay, had 2 touchdowns, 2 INTs. What is it that you're seeing, and what are NFL scouts seeing in Josh Allen that has everybody so excited for what he brings?
Yeah, there's still a good amount of projecting involved. I mean, he had a good year last year, but it wasn't like he blew anybody away. I mean, he had 15 interceptions, including 5 in the Nebraska game. He had 3 multi-interception games in the last 5, and BYU and Wyoming kind of fell off down the stretch, losing 4 of the last 5. But he's number one. People are excited about him because of Carson Wentz. Carson Wentz was recruited by Craig Bull and that staff that's now at Wyoming, and they run a similar offense. So Josh Allen plays in a pretty pro-style offense. He takes snaps under center, and NFL types certainly like that. He's a big quarterback with mobility. He makes some, he tries to do too much sometimes, which is why you see that high interception total, but he makes some ridiculous throws on the move where he can extend plays with his legs, and he has a huge arm, and he can fit passes in the tight window. There's a few plays he made last year where he's rolling out, trying to beat pressure, and just on the run launches a 50-yard pass into the end zone and it's complete. And so I think there's an advanced handling of the offense for him. He sees the field well. He has a big arm. It's just, making good decisions and avoiding trying to do too much. And when you add in his ability, he's not the fastest guy in the world, but he rushed for 523 yards last year. So he's a complete quarterback with a lot of projectable traits for the NFL. That there are a lot of reasons to be excited about him for sure. And I think he could live up to all that hype.
It's probably good that it was raining through most of the game in San Diego.
Yeah.
Matt, we appreciate the time. Great stuff.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.